Have you ever stood before 500 people, letting an incompetent boss turn you into a joke? He thought humiliating me would force my submission to keep my vice president title. He had no idea that the moment the crowd laughed, I drafted his career death warrant. If you want to know how I legally hijacked $30 million and destroyed an arrogant executive without raising my voice even once, listen closely to every word. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for being such a wonderful audience, but unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep this channel running, which means we will soon have to stop posting public videos here. If you enjoy today's story and want to support our team, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon, where you will find exclusive, completely true stories that are much longer, featuring highly detailed situations and multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the description and the pinned comment. Now, let us step into the boardroom for today's story, where I, Chloe Bishop, learned exactly what corporate loyalty is worth. I am 34 years old, and until recently, I was the Vice President of Risk and Compliance at Aegis Biotech, a rapidly rising biomedical technology firm based in Boston. If you know anything about the biotech industry, you know it is a minefield of federal regulations, clinical trial protocols, and relentless audits. My job was to be the invisible shield. I was the one who scrubbed the data, enforced the safety parameters, and kept our researchers out of federal prison when they wanted to cut corners. I spent 5 years of my life sacrificing my weekends and my sleep to ensure Aegis Biotech survived every single rigorous inspection the government threw at us. I cleaned up the messes. I kept the company breathing. And then there was Julian Vance. Julian was our chief executive officer, a man whose primary skills included wearing perfectly tailored Italian suits, buying his way onto the covers of glossy business magazines, and speaking entirely in buzzwords. Julian did not care about molecular biology or patient safety. To him, medical regulations were simply obstacles created by cowards who lacked vision. He viewed my compliance department as a frustrating speed bump on his highway to a massive payout. He was a creature of public relations, obsessed with optics, and completely allergic to actual, tedious work. While I was in the basement servers verifying clinical data, Julian was on a golf course promising investors the moon. The match that lit the powder keg was struck at the annual Boston Biotech Summit. It was the premier event of the year, held in a massive chandelier-lit ballroom packed with 500 of the most influential investors, partners, and competitors in the industry. I was seated at the executive table, wearing a dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. It was my 5-year anniversary at the company. In the weeks leading up to the summit, there had been whispers from the executive team that Julian was going to publicly acknowledge my department's flawless audit record during his keynote address. I actually believed them. I sat there sipping ice water, waiting for a moment of validation for half a decade of grueling, thankless loyalty. Julian took the stage to roaring applause. He flashed his million-dollar smile, adjusted his microphone, and began his presentation on our flagship project. But the speech did not pivot to gratitude. Instead, the tone shifted. Julian paced the stage, his voice echoing through the massive sound system, and suddenly, he pointed a finger directly at my table. He did not praise my caution. He weaponized it. He looked out at the sea of investors and loudly blamed the rigorous safety review processes of the compliance department for the recent delays in our product launch. "Innovation cannot thrive under turtle thinking," Julian announced into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "When you have people obsessed with checking boxes instead of breaking boundaries, you lose momentum, and I refuse to let archaic, fear-based management stall the future of Aegis Biotech." A low murmur rippled through the ballroom. Hundreds of pairs of eyes turned to look at me. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I froze my expression. I did not look away. But Julian was not finished. He needed a grand finale. He needed a sacrifice to appease the impatient venture capitalists in the room. That is exactly why, Julian continued, raising his voice over the whispers. Effective immediately, I am temporarily stripping the Risk and Compliance Office of its oversight on the upcoming Vanguard Horizon disbursement. The $30 million arriving next Monday requires aggressive, forward-thinking management. Therefore, I am handing full control of that capital release to our Director of Marketing, so we can finally start moving at the speed of business. Laughter and scattered applause broke out among Julian's sycophants, the marketing director, a guy who could not spell compliance if you gave him the first 9 letters, stood up and took a bow. It was the ultimate professional execution. Julian had publicly humiliated me, stripped my authority over the largest cash injection in our company's history, and handed it to a yes man, all to cover up his own failure to manage the research timelines. The cameras flashed. The spotlight swept across the room. I sat perfectly still under the blinding lights. I did not shed a single tear. I did not flush with embarrassment. I did not storm out of the ballroom or throw my drink. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, picked up my glass of champagne, and offered Julian a very slight, terrifyingly calm smile. In that exact second, something inside me clicked permanently into place. I realized that my years of blind loyalty were nothing but a pathetic joke to him. He thought that humiliating me in front of 500 people would break my spirit. He thought I would quietly put my head down, swallow the disrespect, and keep doing the dirty work just to hold on to my vice president title. He was wrong. As the applause washed over the room, I was no longer a loyal employee. I was a structural engineer looking at a corrupt building, calculating exactly where to place the explosives. I did not need to scream. I just needed to go back to the office and start nailing his coffin shut. Most people expected me to storm into human resources the next morning and demand a massive severance package. Or maybe they thought I would burst into the executive suite, slamming my hands on mahogany and screaming about unfair treatment. I did none of those things. Anger is loud, but true vengeance is a silent, meticulous architecture. I walked into the office at 6 o'clock on Monday morning, locked my door, and booted up my workstation. Julian Vance was a man who lived purely on the surface. He understood marketing funnels and cocktail hour networking, but he had absolutely no grasp of the digital foundation that kept Aegis Biotech running. When he assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer 2 years ago, he never bothered to audit the structural permissions of our internal network. He completely forgot, or perhaps never even knew, that as the head of risk management, I held the highest level of administrative server access. I was the ghost in the machine. I needed a second set of eyes, someone who could move through data faster than a shadow. I bypassed the standard communication channels and sent an encrypted text to Sarah, my lead data analyst. Sarah was sharp, fiercely loyal, and harbored a mutual, quiet disdain for Julian's superficial leadership style. Within 15 minutes, she was sitting across from my desk, her laptop already glowing. I gave her one simple directive. We were going to cross-reference the research and development reports Julian had submitted to the Vanguard Horizon Fund against the raw telemetry logs housed in the basement servers. For 3 hours, the only sound in my office was the rapid clacking of keyboards. We dug through encrypted partitions and shadow files, tracing the digital footprints Julian thought he had erased. Then, at exactly 9:45, Sarah stopped typing. She turned her monitor toward me, her face completely drained of color. "Look at the Phase 2 efficacy metrics," she whispered. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the side-by-side comparison. It was the smoking gun. The presentation Julian had handed to the investors showed a 92% success rate for our core biomedical product, with 0 severe adverse reactions. But the raw laboratory data told a brutally different story. The actual success rate was hovering around 61%, with significant cellular toxicity in a third of the test models. Julian had not just massaged the numbers, he had actively ordered the data to be falsified to create a pristine, irresistible report. He needed that absolute perfection to secure the $30 million. My blood turned to ice. It was no longer just about my bruised ego or a stolen project. If Vanguard dispersed those $30 million based on fraudulent medical data, it would trigger a federal investigation the second the product failed in clinical trials. And who was the legally designated compliance officer responsible for signing off on all data integrity? Me? Julian was setting me up to be the ultimate scapegoat. When the federal agents came with handcuffs, they would not look at the smiling executive on the magazine covers. They would look at the vice president of risk and compliance. He was not just stealing my credit. He was actively paving my road to federal prison. I needed the uncorrupted truth locked down tight. I left my office and took the freight elevator down to the sub-level laboratories. I needed to see Dr. Elias Thorne. Elias was our lead biomedical scientist, a brilliant, obsessive researcher who practically lived in his lab coat. Julian despised him because Elias cared about peer review instead of profit margins. And in return, Julian had systematically buried Elias in the basement, starving his peripheral projects of vital funding. I found Elias hunched over a microscope. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him exactly what Julian had done to his Phase 2 data. Elias looked like he was going to be physically sick. "We have to lock down the raw files," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I need every piece of breakthrough research you have been working on quietly. The patents Julian has not contaminated yet. We are backing it all up to a secure, off-site encrypted drive right now." Elias nodded sharply, his scientific outrage finally overriding his timid nature. We spent the next 2 hours cloning terabytes of untampered medical data and securing his brilliant, untouched secondary projects. Back in my office, I fully transitioned from a diligent corporate shield to a digital predator. I initiated a covert evidence-gathering campaign across the entire company network. I scraped every email Julian had sent to the lab directors, capturing the thinly veiled threats where he demanded they optimize the results for investor palatability. But I did not stop at the medical fraud. I went after his personal ledger. I pulled the corporate credit card statements and found a disgusting trail of embezzlement. There were lavish nights at high-end gentlemen's clubs, billed as investor networking, luxury yacht rentals in Miami, written off as team-building exercises, and $50,000 in private jet charters logged under emergency travel. Every damning email, every forged clinical graph, every fraudulent invoice was systematically downloaded, encrypted, and funneled into a hidden master file on my local drive. I named the folder Purge Protocol. Julian thought he was running the chessboard because he was standing on the stage, but he failed to realize I was the one controlling the floorboards beneath him. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him, and now I was going to build the perfect trap. I still had exactly 72 hours of full, unrestricted administrative power before my transition was supposed to become officially recognized on the following Monday. I was not going to waste a single minute of that window. The first step required a vessel. You cannot drain a sinking ship without having a lifeboat already in the water to catch the most valuable cargo. Using my executive credentials and a registered agent in Delaware, I incorporated a subsidiary corporate entity. I named it Novacor. On paper, it was categorized as a specialized risk isolation division. This is a perfectly standard legal structure in the biomedical field, usually designed to protect parent companies from experimental liabilities or class action lawsuits. In reality, however, Novacor was a ghost ship. It was fully compliant, legally ironclad, perfectly pristine, and entirely under my sole directorship. The real masterpiece of this operation was the paperwork. I locked my office door, turned off my phone, and spent 14 consecutive hours drafting a comprehensive corporate restructuring binder. It was 312 pages of dense, mind-numbing legalese. I used a 10-point font and structured the paragraphs to be as visually exhausting as possible. It was the exact kind of document designed to make an impatient executive's eyes glaze over by the middle of page 2, but buried deep inside that fortress of boredom. Specifically on page 247, I planted a fatal landmine. I labeled it Clause 7.4-B. The language I used was deliberately dry, but the legal implications were absolute. It stipulated that if the parent company's federal compliance data failed to pass an independent cross-validation review, the entire $30 million Vanguard Horizon disbursement would be instantly frozen to protect investor assets. Furthermore, the clause dictated that the capital would automatically redirect into the secure escrow account of the designated risk isolation entity. That entity, of course, was Novacor. I knew my enemy perfectly. Julian despised reading. He viewed reviewing contracts as a tedious administrative burden completely beneath his visionary status. If a document was over 5 pages long, he simply waited for the legal department to tell him where to put his pen. He also had a fatal, predictable weakness for corporate buzzwords. Knowing this, I printed the massive binder and slipped a customized, glossy cover page onto the front. I titled the entire packet the Accelerated Capital Optimization Roadmap. It sounded exactly like the kind of aggressive, forward-leaning strategy he loved to brag about at networking events. I walked into his corner office at exactly 2:15 on Thursday afternoon. He was leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair, his phone pressed tightly to his ear as he aggressively negotiated a tea time at an exclusive country club for Saturday morning. He glanced up at me, his face twisting with clear annoyance at the interruption. I did not speak a single word. I simply placed the massive binder on his pristine glass desk, opened it to the executive summary page, and slid a solid gold pen toward him. I tapped my index finger firmly on the signature line. "Listen to me. I want the back nine cleared by 10 o'clock. Julian barked into the phone, holding up a finger to tell me to wait. I shook my head slightly, pointed at my watch, and mouthed the words, "Final Vanguard Optimization Authorization." Julian rolled his eyes. He wanted me out of his office so he could finish securing his golf cart. He did not read a single sentence of the summary. He did not flip a single page. He did not ask a single question about the risks. He simply grabbed the pen, scribbled his signature across the dotted line, and waved his hand dismissively to shoo me out of the room. As the door clicked shut behind me, I allowed myself a cold, genuine smile. He had just legally authorized his own financial execution, with his signature secured and legally binding. I moved to the next phase of the operation. A company is not its logo or its office building. It is its people and its intellectual property. Using the newly signed optimization roadmap as my unquestionable legal shield, I initiated an immediate, sweeping internal personnel transfer. I drafted employment addendums for Dr. Elias Thorne and his entire team of top-tier researchers, quietly migrating their employment contracts over to the Novacor subsidiary. I did the exact same thing with the 8 most promising, untainted medical patents we held in the corporate vault. To anyone casually glancing at the human resources dashboard, it just looked like a standard departmental reorganization to increase workflow efficiency. In truth, I was surgically removing the heart and brain of the firm under the guise of an internal shift. I was leaving Julian with nothing but an empty, rotting carcass of a company. There was only one final thread to tie. I needed to ensure that when the hammer finally dropped, Julian would not be able to fight back, rally his allies, or attempt to reverse the transfer. I opened our enterprise resource planning software. This was the central nervous system of the corporation that controlled everything from executive payroll to the magnetic building security locks. I wrote a custom, conditional script and buried it deep inside the automated compliance protocols. The logic was beautifully simple and utterly ruthless. If Clause 7.4-B was ever triggered by the funding redirection, the system would immediately classify the chief executive officer as a critical security liability. The script would automatically suspend his corporate credit cards, instantly revoke his building access credentials, and completely disable his company email and internal communication channels. It was a digital guillotine, fully primed, heavily sharpened, and just waiting for the rope to be cut. Friday evening arrived, bringing with it the kind of nauseating excess that only corporate hubris can fund. To celebrate the $30 million capital injection scheduled for Monday morning, Julian rented out the rooftop penthouse of a premier 5-star hotel overlooking the Boston Harbor. It was a masterclass in premature victory and grotesque spending. Ice sculptures of the Aegis Biotech logo slowly melted next to towering displays of imported seafood, while a string quartet played modern pop songs in the corner. The room was packed with the exact kind of sycophants who laughed too loudly at his jokes and nodded aggressively at his empty buzzwords. I stood near the edge of the terrace, dressed impeccably in a dark evening gown, keeping my physical distance from the center of the room while keeping my eyes firmly on the target. Julian was entirely in his element. He was holding court near the open premium bar, his tailored suit jacket unbuttoned, a crystal flute of vintage champagne permanently attached to his hand. He spotted me standing by the glass railing and simply could not resist the urge to twist the knife one last time. He raised his voice, ensuring the circle of executives and mid-level managers around him fell totally silent. "A toast," Julian announced, staring directly at me with a predatory, triumphant grin. "To the future of our incredible enterprise, because the era of bureaucratic roadblocks, endless red tape, and cowardly thinking is officially over. We are finally moving at the speed of true vision." The crowd chuckled obediently, several of them turning to glance at me with thinly veiled pity. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply locked eyes with him, slowly raised my own glass of sparkling water, and offered him a tight, deeply knowing smile. "Enjoy the champagne, Julian," I thought to myself. "It is the very last thing you will ever drink on the company dime." The first undeniable crack in his fragile empire appeared just before midnight. The party was finally winding down, and the head concierge approached Julian discreetly with a thick, leather-bound folio containing the evening's total expenses. The top-shelf liquor bill alone was over $15,000. Julian, ever the arrogant showman, pulled his heavy corporate black card from his inside pocket and slapped it onto the silver tray without even bothering to look at the total sum. He immediately went back to schmoozing a young investor, fully expecting the seamless, unquestioned transaction he was so accustomed to. 3 agonizing minutes later, the concierge returned. He looked slightly pale, leaning in to whisper urgently in Julian's ear. I watched from across the room as Julian's smug expression instantly evaporated, replaced by a dark, ugly flush of genuine anger. "What do you mean it was declined?" Julian hissed, his voice carrying sharply over the fading background music. He snatched the point-of-sale terminal directly from the waiter's hands, jabbing his black card into the chip reader himself. The machine beeped a sharp, unforgiving tone. "Transaction denied." Julian began furiously berating the poor hotel employee, blaming their archaic payment system and threatening to have the manager fired. But the digital machine did not care about his title or his threats. Faced with the quiet, uncomfortable stares of the remaining elite guests, he had absolutely no choice. He humiliatingly pulled out his personal debit card to cover the massive tab. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. That financial humiliation was just the opening act. By Saturday morning, the digital guillotine I had meticulously programmed dropped its secondary blade. Julian had sent his hand-picked lackeys, the arrogant marketing team who were supposed to be taking over the funding logistics, to the corporate office to access the executive server rooms. They needed to pull data to prepare the final, flashy presentations for the Monday board meeting. But when they pressed their keycards against the biometric scanners, the heavy glass doors did not slide open. Instead, the security panels flashed a brilliant, unforgiving red. A stark message scrolled repeatedly across the digital displays. System authorization error. They tried the secondary doors, locked. They tried the freight elevator access panel, disabled. They were completely shut out of the very infrastructure they thought they controlled. My personal phone began to vibrate violently on my kitchen counter at exactly 8:15 in the morning. It was Julian. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, he called again, then again. Over the next hour, my phone lit up with dozens of frantic calls from him and his panicking management team. I did not answer a single one. I simply switched the device to silent mode, poured myself a fresh cup of hot black coffee, and sat down at my kitchen island. I opened my personal laptop and logged into the backdoor terminal of the company system. I sat there in the quiet comfort of my apartment, sipping my bitter coffee while watching the live audit logs cascade down my screen in beautiful, neon green text. Access denied, transaction rejected, credential revoked. It was a digital symphony of total destruction. When the missed calls failed to get my attention, Julian resorted to bombarding my corporate email inbox with urgent demands, threatening to fire me for gross insubordination if I did not fix the server glitch immediately. I took another slow sip of my coffee, relishing the profound silence of my apartment, and typed out a single, automated reply rule. The internal network is currently undergoing scheduled maintenance in accordance with the Accelerated Capital Optimization Roadmap. As formally authorized and signed by the Chief Executive Officer, system functionality will remain paused until Monday morning. Please remain patient. He was sitting in the dark, throwing a pathetic tantrum because he thought the power had gone out. He was completely blind to the fact that I had not just cut the power, I had demolished the entire power plant, salted the earth beneath it, and walked away with the keys. And the real tsunami was still 24 hours away. The air inside the executive boardroom was thick, suffocatingly tense, carrying the metallic tang of high stakes and impending doom. It was exactly 9 o'clock on Monday morning. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the company's highest-ranking executives, the entire board of directors, and, sitting directly across from me, Marcus. Marcus was the senior representative from the Vanguard Horizon Fund, the man physically holding the keys to our $30 million lifeline. Julian strolled into the room 5 minutes late, a deliberate, calculated power move. He was wearing a freshly pressed charcoal suit, projecting an aura of absolute confidence despite the weekend of locked doors and declined credit cards. He truly believed the technical glitches were just temporary IT incompetence. He had no idea he was walking straight into his own slaughterhouse. Julian took his seat at the head of the long table. He straightened his silk tie, clasped his perfectly manicured hands together, and beamed at Marcus with that trademark, magazine cover smile. He delivered a brief, utterly hollow speech about overcoming obstacles, synergy, and steering the corporate ship toward a golden, profitable horizon. He thanked the board for their unwavering support. Then, he slowly turned his gaze toward me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph, dripping with condescension. He honestly thought the worst thing I could do was sit there and scowl at him from my demoted corner. He expected me to be a defeated spectator to his crowning achievement. "Marcus, my friend," Julian said, his voice echoing confidently in the quiet room. "We are absolutely thrilled to officially welcome Vanguard into the Aegis family today. The paperwork is ready, if you would not mind giving the final verbal confirmation to release the $30 million wire transfer. We can get this new era started immediately." Marcus did not speak. He did not smile. He simply folded his hands on the table and gestured casually toward my side of the room. I stood up slowly. I did not carry a thick stack of defensive papers. I did not look angry or desperate. I only had a small digital remote control in my right hand. "Before we finalize the capital transfer today," I said, my voice completely flat, loud, and devoid of any emotional tremor, "there is a rather critical compliance update that requires the board's immediate attention." Julian rolled his eyes aggressively. He sighed loudly, dramatically looking at his expensive watch as if I were a nagging child interrupting the adults at dinner. He waved his hand at me. "Make it quick, Chloe. We have real business to conduct." I pressed a single button on my remote. The massive projection screen behind Julian illuminated instantly, but instead of the glossy, optimistic financial projections the marketing team had prepared for this exact moment, the screen split into two stark, high-contrast columns. On the left side was the polished, pristine Phase 2 clinical report Julian had personally submitted to Vanguard, boasting a flawless 92% success rate. On the right side was the raw, unedited telemetry data, pulled directly from the laboratory sub-level servers. The real data clearly showed the true 61% success rate, alongside highlighted warnings regarding severe cellular toxicity. The silence that violently crashed over the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a devastating car crash. You could hear the faint hum of the ceiling air conditioning. The senior board members leaned forward in their leather chairs, their eyes darting back and forth between the two contrasting documents. The color drained completely from the faces of the chief financial officer and the legal counsel. They were seasoned corporate veterans, and they knew exactly what they were looking at. This was not a minor accounting error. This was premeditated federal fraud. To eliminate any possible deniability, I had digitally highlighted Julian's exact authorization signature and the corresponding IP address timestamps on the manipulated files. Julian twisted in his chair to look at the massive screen behind him. For 3 agonizing seconds, his brain simply could not process the visual information. He blinked rapidly, his jaw physically slackening as the terrifying reality of the undeniable evidence washed over his mind. The color vanished from his arrogant face. Before Julian could formulate a single, pathetic excuse to save his career, I pressed the second button on my remote. The screen shifted away from the damning medical data and logged directly into the secure corporate banking portal, interfacing seamlessly with the Vanguard routing system. Massive, bold red text dominated the entire wall for everyone to read. It stated, "Transaction $30 million US. Cancelled. Reason: violation of Clause 7.4-B. Julian erupted like a dying volcano. He slammed both of his hands down onto the heavy mahogany table so hard that the crystal water glasses rattled violently. He shot up from his chair, his face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. "What the hell is this?" he screamed, his voice cracking with a chaotic mixture of panic and pure rage. "This is a lie. This is a complete, fabricated lie." He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger directly at my face across the long table. "You are fired. Do you hear me? You are fired right this second. Security. Someone call the security desk immediately. She is trying to tank this entire company because she is a bitter, vindictive subordinate who could not handle losing her little project." He looked wildly around the room, desperately trying to rally the stunned board members, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. "She hacked the internal system. She is committing corporate sabotage right in front of you. Marcus, please, listen to me. This woman is entirely insane. I am having her arrested for cybercrimes." The room remained frozen in a state of absolute shock. Nobody reached for a phone. Nobody called down to the security desk. Nobody even looked at Julian. Instead, Marcus calmly unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket, reached into his sleek leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He placed it gently on the table with a soft thud. Marcus did not look angry. He did not look surprised. In fact, Marcus smiled. It was a cold, incredibly surgical smile that sent a shiver down the spine of everyone watching. "No one is calling security, Julian," Marcus said, his tone chillingly even and authoritative. "And absolutely no one is firing Chloe today, mainly because you no longer have the legal authority to do so." Julian stopped screaming mid-sentence. His mouth hung open in silent horror as he stared blankly at the Vanguard representative. Marcus tapped his index finger against the manila folder. "Chloe sent my risk assessment team the full, unredacted laboratory data last Wednesday night. We have spent the entire weekend verifying every single page of it with our independent medical analysts. Your forged clinical report was a direct violation of federal law. Julian, you tried to sell us poison wrapped in a pretty bow, but Vanguard Horizon does not run away from genuinely good science just because of spectacularly bad management. We are not withdrawing our capital investment." Marcus opened the heavy folder and slid a fresh, legally binding document across the long wooden table, directly toward Julian's shaking hands. "The $30 million is still very much in play," Marcus continued, his sharp eyes locked onto Julian's rapidly crumbling facade. "But those funds do not belong to you anymore, according to the accelerated capital optimization roadmap that you personally signed last Thursday afternoon. A failure to pass our independent cross-validation triggers an automatic, unblockable redirection of all Vanguard funds. The entire $30 million was legally routed 30 minutes ago into the secure escrow account of the designated risk isolation entity. Julian looked down at the official paper, his hands trembling violently as he read the bold print at the top of the contract. His breathing became incredibly shallow. Marcus leaned back in his expensive chair, lacing his fingers together. The money is now the exclusive, undisputed property of Novacor, Marcus announced, delivering the final, devastating, and inescapable blow to Julian's entire existence. A completely clean, fully compliant, legally distinct entity, completely free from your toxic, fraudulent liabilities, an entity which, as of this morning, has formally appointed Chloe Bishop as its founding chief executive officer. Julian lunged across the heavy mahogany table with the desperation of a drowning man. He clawed the thick manila folder directly from Marcus's hands, his eyes frantically scanning the dense, legally binding text. His breathing turned ragged and shallow as his gaze locked onto the bottom of the page. There, sitting stark and undeniable, was his own flamboyant signature in blue ink. It was the exact same signature he had so arrogantly scribbled onto the accelerated capital optimization roadmap just 4 days prior without reading a single word. As his mind finally processed the full weight of the document, the horrifying reality of his situation crushed the remaining air from his lungs. He flipped wildly through the attached addendums, reading the clauses that detailed the permanent transfer of our top-tier patents and the migration of the employment contracts for Dr. Elias Thorne and the entire brilliant research division. He had not just lost the $30 million. He had legally signed away his company's brain, its future, and its treasury, leaving Aegis Biotech as an empty, worthless, rotting shell. I did not give him a single moment to recover or formulate a lie. I calmly reached into my leather portfolio, withdrew a single sheet of crisp white paper, and slid it across the smooth surface of the table until it rested directly over his trembling hands. That is my formal resignation from the position of Vice President of Risk and Compliance, I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy, echoing coldly in the dead silence of the room. It went into effect exactly 5 minutes ago. You are officially the sole executive responsible for the impending wreckage of this company. Julian opened his mouth to scream, his face twisting into an ugly mask of pure hatred, but he was abruptly interrupted by the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swinging violently open. It was not the building security team he had desperately called for earlier. Instead, a team of stern federal agents strode into the room, their faces entirely devoid of expression. They were flanked by official inspectors wearing the prominent badges of the Food and Drug Administration. The lead agent, a tall man in a dark suit, bypassed the stunned executives and walked directly to the head of the table. "Julian Vance," the agent asked, his tone flat and absolute. "We have a federal warrant for the immediate seizure of your servers and your personal arrest regarding multiple counts of wire fraud and the deliberate falsification of federal medical testing data. The primary authorization documents bear your direct signature." The remaining board members and executives at the table instantly recoiled, pulling their chairs away as if Julian were suddenly dangerously contagious. The remaining color drained from Julian's face, leaving him looking like a terrified, empty shell of a man. The federal agents did not afford him the dignity of a quiet, private exit. They instructed him to stand up, forcing him to place his hands behind his back, and secured the heavy steel handcuffs right there in the middle of the executive boardroom. As they marched him through the glass corridors of the corporate floor, dozens of employees stopped working and watched in stunned, absolute silence. Julian kept his head bowed, his arrogant facade completely shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces, but his ultimate humiliation was waiting for him down in the executive parking garage. When the agents paused to allow him to retrieve his personal house keys from his leased corporate luxury sedan, the parking space designated for the chief executive officer was completely empty. I had initiated an automated vehicle repossession order through the fleet management software at 5 o'clock that morning. Furthermore, his digital parking pass had been permanently revoked, meaning the garage attendants would not even let him call a private car to the lower level. He had no money, no car, no power, and absolutely nowhere to hide from the mess he had created. Back up in the boardroom, the frantic energy had completely dissipated. The terrified executives had scattered to call their own lawyers, leaving only Marcus and me sitting alone in the quiet room. I stood up from my side chair and took a seat at the very head of the table, sitting in the exact spot where Julian had been reigning just 20 minutes earlier. I pulled my silver pen from my pocket, uncapped it, and calmly signed my name at the bottom of the Vanguard Horizon Partnership Agreement. Fast forward to a week later, I am standing in front of the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my brand-new corner office. The frosted lettering on the double doors behind me reads, Novacor, proudly displaying my hard-earned title as Chief Executive Officer. Across the city, the rotting empire of Aegis Biotech is drowning under a massive avalanche of class action lawsuits, federal indictments, and insurmountable financial debt. Meanwhile, I am holding the uncorrupted future of biomedical technology securely in my hands, surrounded by a team of scientists who finally have the funding and the freedom to change the world. People often assume that vengeance requires screaming matches, broken glass, or massive emotional explosions, but true revenge is never loud. Revenge is the quiet, calculated stroke of a pen, a deeply buried legal clause, an absolute, suffocating silence right before you watch your rival fall completely into the abyss. Thank you all so very much for taking the time out of your day to listen to my story. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know down in the comments. If you found today's journey into corporate justice satisfying, please consider helping us keep this channel alive. As we mentioned earlier, YouTube has disabled our monetization, and we rely entirely on our amazing community to keep bringing these stories to life. By joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon, you will gain access to our absolute best, completely true, and exclusive stories that are simply too detailed and intense to publish publicly on YouTube. You will hear much longer episodes featuring incredible emotional performances by multiple voice actors in the same story. You can easily join our community by scanning the QR code right here on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link down in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart. And remember, never let anyone underestimate your silence.